We're always told that things like freedom and democracy and property rights are the essential ingredients for a country to get rich. But what if that's not the whole story? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating and kind of uncomfortable paradox: how economies built on oppression can sometimes achieve absolutely spectacular growth. It's a tough question to even ask, right? Can a society that is fundamentally designed to extract wealth from most people to benefit a tiny few, can that system actually create prosperity? Well, it turns out history is full of some very surprising and complicated answers. Just let that sink in for a second. An American journalist goes to the brand new Soviet Union, and he doesn't see a brutal tyranny taking shape. He sees a revolutionary new model for humanity. And for decades, a lot of people in the West kind of agreed with him. They saw the USSR as a real economic rival. So, what exactly were they seeing? Okay, let's start right there with that huge Soviet experiment, because it is the perfect case study for understanding how this kind of growth gets built and why, in the end, it's really just a mirage. So, after he grabbed total power, Stalin had a plan that was as simple as it was brutal. He was going to force the country to industrialize at lightning speed. And to pay for it, he was going to seize every single farm in the country. This collectivization, as they called it, was an absolute human catastrophe. It led directly to a famine that killed an estimated 6 million people. A truly horrifying price for an economic plan.
And yet, here's the number that just blew everyone's minds: 6%. Between 1928 and 1960, the Soviet economy grew, on average, by 6% a year. That is a staggering rate. For a while, from the outside, it really did look like Steffens was right. The future was working. But how?
Well, the secret to this Soviet miracle wasn't some brilliant innovation. It was brute force reallocation. The state literally just picked up millions of people from these incredibly unproductive, almost medieval farms and dropped them into factories. Now, those factories were wildly inefficient by Western standards, but they were still way more productive than what those people were doing before. And right there, that's the fatal flaw in the whole model. See, you can only play that reallocation trick once. After all that low-hanging fruit was picked, the engine of growth just sputtered out. By the 1970s, the big boom was a distant memory, and by the 80s, the entire system was just grinding to a halt, completely unable to innovate its way out of the problem. And the central planning created these really bizarre, counterproductive incentives. So check out what they called the ratchet effect. Imagine you're a factory worker. If you work really hard and you blow past your quota to get a bonus, the planners in Moscow don't say great job. They say, this factory can produce more, and they just ratchet up your quota for next year. So what's the smartest thing to do? You do just enough to get by, maybe even underproduce, so nobody gets any bright ideas. The system actually punished efficiency.
In the end, the system fell back on what it knew best: force. Millions were imprisoned for things like idling on the job. But here's the fundamental lesson. You can threaten someone to make them dig a ditch faster, for sure, but you absolutely cannot threaten them into inventing the microchip. Real, lasting growth comes from innovation, and that's something coercion can never, ever produce.
But here's the thing. The Soviet story, it wasn't a one-off. This exact same pattern of extractive growth, well, it's a theme that echoes throughout all of human history, going back way, way further than the 20th century. Let's go to the Congo. In Central Africa, you have two groups of people, the Lele and the Bushang. They live on opposite sides of the same river. They have the same geography, same ethnic origins, but the Lele were incredibly poor, stuck in subsistence farming and endless conflict. Meanwhile, the Bushang were prosperous, with a real market economy and a stable society. So, what was the difference? The difference was politics. Around the year 1620, a brilliant leader named King Shayam came to power among the Bushang and pulled off a political revolution. He created a centralized state, imposed law and order, a court system, a bureaucracy, the whole shebang. But why? Well, it was to make it easier to collect taxes and extract wealth from his people. His extractive state created the stability that, as a byproduct, allowed an economic revolution to happen. We can see this pattern even further back. All the way back to the dawn of civilization. We usually think that people started farming and then they settled down in villages. But archaeological evidence from a people called the Natufians in the Middle East, well, it flips that whole story on its head. They built permanent settlements while they were still hunter-gatherers. And this suggests something pretty radical. It suggests that a political innovation actually came first. An elite group probably figured out how to concentrate power, get people to settle down, not for everyone's benefit, but to make it easier to control them and extract resources, like grain. So this extractive institution may have actually been the real spark that lit the agricultural revolution.
Okay, so we've seen how this kind of extractive growth can happen. It can be a really powerful engine, but it always, and I mean always, contains the seeds of its own destruction. Let's take a look at why these systems are ultimately doomed to fail. It really boils down to two huge fatal flaws. First, just like we saw with the Soviets, these systems can't create real, sustained innovation. They're all about squeezing more out of the existing pie, not baking a new, bigger one. And second, because they create so much wealth for the people at the top, they breed deep, vicious political instability. And for the perfect example of that, we need to go to the Maya. So the Maya built one of the most brilliant and sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world. And this chart here, it shows the number of dated monuments they carved each year. You can just see it, this dramatic, soaring rise to a peak around 750 AD, and then whoosh, a sudden, almost total collapse. So what happened? Well, each Mayan city-state was run by a divine king who extracted enormous wealth from the common people. But here's the trap. The richer the kingdom got, the bigger the prize became for anyone who wanted to conquer it. This created a vicious cycle of constant, brutal warfare between the rival city-states, what some archaeologists even call Star Wars. And this reveals that second fatal flaw in all its glory. The Mayan collapse wasn't because of a drought or some mysterious disease, it was political. The system literally ate itself from the inside out. The endless fighting among the elites for control of the wealth extraction machine led to a complete breakdown of society, and the lights went out on an entire civilization. All right, so we've bounced from the Soviet Union to the Congo, from the Neolithic to the Maya. So what's the big takeaway here? What is the fundamental nature of this trap that so many different societies have fallen into over and over again? It really all comes down to this one core concept: extractive institutions. These are basically the rules of the game, the laws, the systems, the norms that are set up for one purpose: to allow one group of people to take income and wealth from another group. They can look sophisticated, they can create order, but their primary goal is extraction. And that's exactly why this kind of growth is ultimately a mirage. It can look unbelievably real and powerful for a while, maybe even for centuries. But it's an illusion because it's built on a foundation of sand. It doesn't have an engine for real innovation, and by creating this giant pot of gold for the elites, it guarantees that they will eventually fight each other to the death over who gets to control it. In the end, this isn't just a bunch of interesting stories from history books. It's a fundamental dynamic of how human societies work. This pattern of spectacular but fragile growth, built on extraction and destined for conflict, has repeated itself for at least 10,000 years. And that leaves us with one last, big question. Where might we be seeing this exact same pattern playing out right now in the world today?